The crash October 29, 2018. Lion Air Flight 610 takes off from Jakarta at 6:20 a.m. 12 minutes later, it plunges into the Java Sea at 450 miles per hour. All 189 people aboard are killed instantly. The pilots fought the aircraft for 11 minutes. They lost. March 10, 2019. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 300 departs Addis Ababa at 8:38 a.m. 6 minutes into the flight, it nosedives into a field at over 500 miles per hour. 157 people dead. The pilots followed Boeing's emergency procedures exactly. It didn't matter. Same aircraft, same malfunction, same result. 346 people dead in less than 5 months. But here's what makes this psychologically devastating. Boeing knew. Engineers knew the system was flawed. Executives knew pilots weren't trained. Regulators knew corners were being cut. And everyone proceeded anyway. This isn't a story about a software glitch. This is about minds that chose profit over safety. About corporate psychopathy that values stock price over human life. About groupthink so powerful that 346 deaths became acceptable collateral damage. The aircraft was the Boeing 737 MAX. The system was called MCAS, and the psychology behind its failure reveals how ordinary people, working at one of America's most respected companies, committed what amounts to corporate manslaughter. To understand the psychology, you need to understand what Boeing did. In 2011, Airbus announced the A320neo, a fuel-efficient upgrade that threatened Boeing's dominance. Boeing faced a choice: design a new aircraft from scratch, taking 10 years and $15 billion, or modify the existing 737 to compete immediately. They chose modification, but there was a problem. To fit larger, more efficient engines, Boeing had to mount them higher and more forward on the wing. This changed the aircraft's aerodynamics. During certain maneuvers, the nose could pitch up unexpectedly, potentially causing a stall and crash. The engineering solution was MCAS, Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, an automated system that would push the nose down if sensors detected excessive pitch. Sounds reasonable, but here's where the psychology becomes critical. Boeing made for decisions that directly led to 346 deaths. Decision 1. Single sensor dependency. MCAS relied on one angle of attack sensor. If that sensor malfunctioned, MCAS would receive false data and push the nose down repeatedly even when the aircraft was flying normally. Engineers proposed using two sensors. Management rejected it. Cost and complexity. This is organizational psychopathy, prioritizing efficiency over safety, because victims are abstract and distant. Decision 2. Pilot ignorance. Boeing didn't tell pilots MCAS existed. The system wasn't mentioned in pilot manuals. No simulator training was provided. Why? Because informing pilots would mean the MAX require different certification from older 737s. That would cost airlines money and time. Boeing's sales pitch was it flies just like a 737. That was a lie. This is deception through omission, a core Machiavellian trait. Decision 3. Override limitations. When pilots tried to counteract MCAS, the system would re-engage every 5 seconds, pushing the nose down again. Pilots had to fight the aircraft continuously. Boeing knew this was exhausting and dangerous. They proceeded anyway. The designers understood pilots would struggle, and they accepted that. This is moral disengagement, distancing yourself from consequences by focusing on technical specifications rather than human reality. Decision 4. Regulatory capture. Boeing convinced the FAA to let Boeing employees certify their own aircraft. The regulators became rubber stamps. Internal messages later revealed Boeing employees mocking the FAA. "I still have been forgiven by God for the covering up I did last year." They knew they were lying. They joked about it. This is cognitive distortion, treating unethical behavior as a game rather than life and death responsibility. On October 29, 2018, Lion Air 610's angle of attack sensor malfunctioned. MCAS pushed the nose down. The pilots pulled it up. MCAS pushed again. This happened 21 times in 11 minutes. The pilots were fighting a system they didn't know existed. At 6:32 a.m., they lost. The aircraft hit the water at 450 miles per hour. 189 people dead. Boeing's response: they blamed the pilots, issued a bulletin describing the problem but not the solution, told airlines it was a training issue. 5 months later, Ethiopian 300 to crash the exact same way. 157 more dead. The culture of concealment after the crashes. Investigators found something psychologically revealing. Boeing knew about MCAS problems before the first crash. In 2016, Chief Technical Pilot Mark Faulkner discovered MCAS was running rampant in simulators. His messages: granted, I suck at flying, but even this was egregious. He convinced the FAA to remove MCAS from pilot manuals. Read that again. Boeing's own chief pilot knew the system was dangerous, and his solution wasn't to fix it, it was to hide it from other pilots. This is rationalization justifying unethical behavior through incremental steps that individually seem reasonable but collectively become catastrophic. After Lion Air crashed, Boeing had 5 months to ground the MAX fleet globally. They didn't. Why? The psychology here is complex. First, there's sunk cost fallacy. Boeing had invested billions in the MAX. Grounding it would be admitting failure. Second, there's overconfidence. Bias. Engineers believed the problem was pilot error, not system design. They'd flown 737s for 50 years. Surely they knew better than Indonesian and Ethiopian pilots. This is ego overriding evidence. Third, there's diffusion of responsibility. No single person made the decision to keep flying. It emerged from committees and departmental consensus. When everyone is responsible, no one feels responsible. Psychologists call this moral dilution. The more people involved in an unethical decision, the less guilty each individual feels. CEO Dennis Muilenburg exemplified this. After Lion Air, he told investors the 737 MAX was as safe as any airplane that has ever flown the skies. He knew about the MCAS issues. He knew pilots weren't trained. He said it anyway. In March 2019, days before Ethiopian 300 crashed, he was still defending the aircraft publicly. Here's the disturbing part. Muilenburg likely believed what he said. This is motivated reasoning. The brain processes information to reach a desired conclusion rather than an accurate one. When your bonus depends on the MAX succeeding, your brain finds ways to interpret evidence favorably. It's not conscious deception. It's unconscious self-deception, which makes it more dangerous because you can't fight a bias you don't know you have. After Ethiopian 302, the world grounded the MAX. Boeing stock dropped 25%. The company faced criminal charges and paid $2.5 billion in fines. Muilenburg was fired with a $60 million severance. Not one executive went to prison. Not one engineer was criminally charged. The families of 346 victims got money. They didn't get justice because the people who killed their loved ones didn't see themselves as killers. They saw themselves as engineers making tough decisions under competitive pressure. The psychological profile. Now we can construct the complete psychological profile not of one person, but of an organization. Because the 737 MAX disaster reveals corporate psychopathy, a phenomenon where organizations exhibit psychopathic traits even when individual members don't. Corporate psychopathy assessment. Trait 1. Lack of empathy. 9 out of 10. Boeing executives knew pilots were struggling with MCAS. They had data showing confusion and fear. Their response was to blame pilots publicly. After Lion Air, internal messages joked about the media coverage. No genuine remorse. No emotional connection to the 189 people who died terrified, fighting an aircraft that wouldn't respond. This is textbook empathy deficit. Trait 2. Manipulative behavior. -9 out of 10. Boeing manipulated everyone. Manipulated the FAA by capturing the regulatory process. manipulated pilots by hiding MCAS from manuals, manipulated airlines by claiming no retraining was needed, manipulated investors by insisting the MAX was safe. They did this systematically, with legal teams and PR departments coordinating the deception. Trait 3. Grandiosity. 8 out of 10. Boeing believed they were too important to fail, too established to be fundamentally wrong. 50 years of 737 success created arrogance. We've built 10,000 of these. We know what we're doing. This is organizational narcissism, belief that your track record makes you infallible. Trait 4. Irresponsibility. -9 out of 10. After 2 crashes, Boeing blamed pilots, airlines, maintenance crews, everyone except themselves. Muhlenberg's congressional testimony showed zero acceptance of personal responsibility. He apologized to families but framed the disasters as unforeseeable accidents rather than direct results of Boeing's decisions. Trait 5. Callousness. 8 out of 10. The most chilling detail: Boeing knew exactly how the crash would happen. Engineers had seen MCAS runaway events in simulators. They knew pilots would fight the system, exhaust themselves, and lose control. They didn't just fail to prevent this, they actively concealed it from the people most at risk. That's not negligence, that's callousness. Overall corporate psychopathy score: 8.6 out of 10. This places Boeing's organizational behavior during the MAX crisis in the highest tier of corporate pathology. The cognitive biases that enabled this disaster are textbook. Optimism bias convinced engineers that MCAS failures would be rare enough to be acceptable. They were wrong by orders of magnitude. Groupthink meant no one in leadership challenged the core assumptions. Descending engineers were sidelined. Sunk cost fallacy prevented grounding the MAX because of the investment already made. Moral licensing from Boeing's history of safe aircraft created psychological permission to cut corners. And diffusion of responsibility allowed every individual to claim they were just one voice in a large organization. No one felt personally accountable. Boeing isn't unique. This exact psychological pattern appears in disaster after disaster. Ford Pinto, Challenger explosion, Deepwater Horizon, Tyrannos, FTX. The structure is always the same. Competitive pressure creates urgency. Cost-cutting becomes rationalized as efficiency. Warning signs get reinterpreted as acceptable risk. Dissent is silenced through organizational hierarchy. Disaster occurs. Leadership expresses surprise and deflects blame. Here's what makes corporate psychopathy especially dangerous: it's legal. Dennis Muhlenberg faced no criminal charges. He lost his job but kept tens of millions. The engineers who hid MCAS from pilots, still working in aerospace, the regulatory captors at the FAA, promoted or retired comfortably. The system that killed 346 people, it's still running. Not at Boeing specifically, they fixed the MAX, but the psychology that enabled it exists in every major corporation facing competitive pressure and quarterly earnings targets. If you work in an organization exhibiting these warning signs, you're inside a disaster waiting to happen. Leadership deflects all external criticism. Cost and schedule repeatedly override safety concerns. Dissenting opinions are treated as disloyalty. Complex ethical issues are reduced to legal questions. Competitive pressure justifies shortcuts. No one can articulate who is personally responsible for safety decisions. If you see these together, you're watching corporate psychopathy build. The question is whether you'll be the engineer who stays silent, the executive who rationalizes, or the person who walks away before the system collapses. 346 people didn't get that choice. They trusted Boeing. Boeing trusted profit. And that psychology gap, that's the distance between takeoff and impact.